everyone, welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, the Olympic flame will arrive in Rio's Maracana Stadium within hours. The build-up to the 2016 Olympics has been dogged by controversy and scandal. Will all this be forgotten once the sport finally takes central stage? And nuclear bombs were tested in Australia's deserts in the 1950s without much consideration for their effect on the indigenous community. A new movie using the latest film technology tells the tale. We speak exclusively to the producers of Collisions.
CCTV News will be bringing you all the up-to-date coverage from the 2016 Rio Olympics. With multiple correspondents in the region, we'll be reporting all the highlights from the Games, as well as monitoring economic and political developments in Brazil. Join us for Rio 2016, only on CCTV News.
Yes, we start our program with the Rio Olympics, which will begin within a few hours. The opening ceremony will kick off at the Maracana Stadium at 8 p.m. tonight in Brazil. That is 7 a.m. Beijing time on Saturday morning. With the Games being held in South America for the first time, 2007 teams will compete in Rio, including the refugee Olympic team. After months of debates on Russian doping scandal and concerns over Zika virus and Brazil's domestic problems, the sports party is finally just around the corner. Let's take a look.
It's time for the Rio party. The 2016 Rio Olympic Games officially start on Friday with the opening ceremony. This is the first time the Games will be held in South America. 10,500 athletes from 206 countries and regions and a refugee team are going to compete in 28 sports. Rio also marks the return of golf and rugby to the Olympics.
This is my first Olympics, so it's crazy seeing how many athletes and just how many people from all over the world here, and it's so cool. Everybody's together, so it's really interesting.
Over the past few months, the Games have been shadowed by the Russian doping scandal, the Zika, and issues with the city's security, infrastructure, and venues. Now, however, it is time for the sport itself to take center stage. Excitement for the gala is spreading across the Olympic city.
The feel is very good. It's the first Olympic in Brazil. And I and my family, it's a very good to the match.
These are also the first Games to have a refugee Olympic team. It will compete under the Olympic flag with 10 members, 5 from South Sudan, 2 from Syria, 2 from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and 1 from Ethiopia.
We want to thank everyone who is supporting us, who gave us the chance to be here, to follow our dreams again, to give us the hope that we still are humans and we are not only refugees, we are like everyone in the world. We can do something, we can achieve something.
The Olympic torch has made its way to Rio de Janeiro. Tickets for the opening ceremony have already sold out. At 8 p.m. local time on Friday night, the Maracana Stadium will show Brazilian creativity to the world, under themes of the garden, diversity, and joy. 3 billion people are expected to tune in to watch the opening ceremony. Rio seems ready for the sports party. Are you?
Yes, I am ready. For further discussion on the Rio Olympics in Beijing, I'm joined by Dong Jun, sports commentator. And also in London, we are having Simon Pusey, sports broadcaster and commentator. And also in Athens, Ohio, we have Mr. Norman O'Reilly, professor and chair of the Department of Sports Administration at the College of Business in Ohio University. He also served on the Canadian Olympic Committee as mission staff member for the Athens, Beijing, and Vancouver Olympic Games. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. It's going to be a big day in Brazil. Let's start by asking you the question. Professor O'Reilly, former president of Brazil, Mr. Lula, back in 2009, when the country was bidding for the Olympic Games, he promised what he called passionate, creative, and happy Olympic Games in Rio. Are we going to see that?
I think so. I've been fortunate to have been to Rio twice the past year. I'm the deputy chef for the Canadian team going to the Paralympic Games, and I'll be going back in a few weeks. And the energy, the excitement, the staff of the Rio Paralympic and Olympic committees is really, really there. Obviously, there's been major issues that we've talked about and preparedness scandal that you mentioned earlier, the video mentioned, but the actual staff, the people, they know they're going to put their country on display. They did a good job during the World Cup. They did a good job during the Pan American Games a few years ago. I'm very confident that it's going to be a wonderful celebration of Brazilian culture and energy and their athletes.
Well, I'm looking forward to the samba, of course, and all the passions that is there in the country, despite of all kinds of problems. Talking about problems, though, Mr. Pusey, I have to mention all of them. There's a long list of them. Zika virus, there's a security problem, there's also a lot of issues related to the environment, the water, whether it's clean, and doping scandal, one after another. So, with all of this, are you still confident about this year's Olympic Games?
Yeah, absolutely. This is part of the Olympics. This is what happens every 4 years. Whichever country hosts the Olympics, there's always a big scandal of some sort. It's what happens when the eyes of the world are on a country, and especially a developing nation like Brazil that's never hosted the Olympics before. There are always going to be problems. But I think once the Games starts, everyone forgets about that, and it's all about the sport. I think you're always going to get these controversies and these problems, and there no doubt are many of them in Brazil at the moment with the economy the way it is, and there's been lots of protests. But if you just look back to the Confederations Cup and the World Cup that they've just hosted, those went off pretty well, considering there was equally big scandals before those competitions. So I think in the end, when the sports start, we'll be talking about the athletes and the sports as opposed to the controversies. Let's
talk about the sports stars, but first of all, we need to talk about the delegation. There's one delegation that is 30% short. That is the Russian delegation, Mr. Dong, here in Beijing. Of course, that was as a result of the doping scandal. But the question is, Russia being a very strong sports nation, without its whole delegation participating, particularly in weightlifting and track and field, is this Olympic Games still going to be excellent as Olympic Games should be?
I think the IOC or the entire Olympic movement will stress that participation is more important than winning. And of course, those marks set in the races in track and field and some of the other sports will be important, but there will be gold, silver, and medals achieved.
Of course.
And so the excitement will still be there.
Yeah, but the level, what about the level, Professor O'Reilly? What do you think? Is Canada and the United States going to have a bigger chance of winning more medals? That's for sure, but what about the overall level of sports, particularly these kinds of categories?
Well, I think it's a great question and a great point, and I think you have to have confidence in the IOC and WADA that they've made the decision to allow athletes that have a really strong suspicion or a history of doping. And I think fans, and we know fans of the Olympic Games, want clean sport. So to your point, I think it's balanced off. So some of the legends of Russian track and field and weightlifting won't be there, but I think also people want to see clean athletes, and they want. We've seen that in cycling, we've seen it in other sports, and people will say, okay, let's have confidence that WADA and the IOC have done their job and that they've made the right decision, and we have to have that confidence. And these organizations, they showed it with the Lance Armstrong scandal. They don't make decisions without really strong evidence. And so I think you have to be confident the best clean athletes in the world are going to be there, and hopefully we can really be excited about that, and we know that matters to fans of the Olympic Games.
But you know, Professor O'Reilly, there's always the issue of whether one individual, knowing or particularly without knowing what happened to him or her, should be responsible for what a country's sports system has done if the accusation against the Russian delegation as a whole were correct. What do you say?
I agree with you 100%. I mean, you saw this at the recent IOC decision. It was really a hard decision. And you have to believe that those that were in those situations had unrefutable evidence that those that they're not, because the thought of myself too as a former athlete and people not being allowed to compete who are clean is really scary when an athlete's put their life into it. And I think that's why they went with the individual rights over the kind of the collective. And I think it was a good decision, and obviously there's a lot of angst right now in some athletes that are waiting and have appealed, etc. And I think we just really have to have hope that the system is there and that only those with really strong evidence that they were part of the system-wide doping or that they themselves have been part of doping practices would not be allowed to compete, and those that are clean are able to compete. So I think we have to have trust in the organizations, and they've shown that in the past that that works. So.
Well, that's of course one question. The other question related to it, Mr. Pusey, is that as a result of that, as a result of the punishment against the Russian delegation, are we going to see an extremely clean games this time for the Olympic Games? What are the things that's going to guarantee that? Where actually the practices have not changed at all. So some have been punished, but further probably will pop up.
Yeah, I think it's so hard, impossible to guarantee you're going to see a clean games, and that's why it's so important for the IOC to be seen to be doing the right thing for people who have been caught doping, because it just mars every competition in the future. There's always that level of suspicion. I don't think you can ever guarantee it, but you just have to hope, don't you? Because these things are in place to try and catch people, to stop people from doing it, to block people, and you just have to hope. What I'm really excited and looking forward to is seeing those new stars heard anything about that just suddenly crop up, and you realize Ning Tao in the Chinese team is currently getting a lot of attention. These people who suddenly just break onto the scene. I think that's what really people really look forward to seeing with the Olympic spirit. But in terms of doping and it being clean, that's something that the IOC need to keep working on, need to keep improving these tests so that in the future we don't get these big scandals like we've just seen with the Russian team.
Yeah, but one of the things that Mr. Dong, you know this better than a lot of the other audience members, that the athletes have to be extremely careful of what they eat, what they drink, and what kind of medicine they take. Sometimes these kind of things could have the side effect that would share the same kind of symptom as doping. So how can the athletes avoid all of this? And sometimes even when you come to Chinese traditional medicine, they are curing certain kind of disease, but it could have the side effect. So are we going to see athletes becoming extremely cautious about what they are taking? Are we going to see an extremely cautious Olympic Games this time as a result of this? What would that mean for the athletes' performances?
Of course, doping issue this time around is bigger than ever, but I think when athletes come to an Olympics, they are well prepared and they are professionally trained and managed. It's not up to the athletes like the Chinese athletes themselves to decide on their diet. It's all up to professional managers.
They have to rely on their teams.
Yeah, and professionals. Yeah, so I think it has been, with or without the Russian issue, it has been something the athletes have to be particularly careful about. And of course, this time, even with those, clean, qualified Russian athletes participating in the Rio Games, they still need to be very careful because they will be watched even more closely than most other athletes. And the pressure will pose, tremendous psychological impact on them. And it will be interesting for us to see their performance.
Performance, others' performance as well. Talking about performance, I really have to go to you, Professor O'Reilly. Before you go, I know you have only a few minutes joining us. What do you make of the overall medal tally eventually? I mean, now you have a weaker Russia delegation, obviously. The other going to take advantage of this? What about the United States performance? You are teaching in Ohio University. What about Canada? What about China? Which one delegation, which star, which category are you going to watch very closely?
Great. I'm able to stay a bit longer if you need me, but it's a great question.
That would be wonderful. Great.
And the reality is that, and especially in a country like Canada, medals are extremely important. And so we saw this in the 1984 Games with Canada got a lot more medals. A lot of the funding mechanisms in Canada and other countries, and the U.S. here through the USOC, the government's not involved. But the funding mechanisms to athletes are based on medals. We also know that sponsors, fans, corporations who are sponsors or partners or supporters care about medals. Medals get in the media, medalists get well known, fifth place doesn't. So if the removal of an athlete who might have been third and you would have been fourth and now you get a bronze medal, that has enormous impact for the athlete specifically. They're going to benefit from it, attention, sponsors, funding, etc. For the entity, so in Canada it would be Sport Canada or the Canadian Olympic Committee or the US Olympic Committee, they get another medal. That helps them with their sponsors, their government supporters, their partners, their funders, their so you're right, medals matter, and the fact that a major player has lost part of its team, and a lot of those, as you mentioned, and the others have mentioned, are medal threats. For me, if I was the 5th ranked in X and now one of my big competitors out there, that's a big opportunity to add a medal, and at a country level, also a big opportunity.
So what about you, Mr. Dong? Is China going to move up in the medal tally as a result, just as maybe Canada and some of the other countries? Which star, which category, which delegation are you going to watch very closely in terms of expecting their best performances?
You know, as a supporter of all Chinese athletes, I will be watching, those events with or without medal hopes. Of course, we will be watching, we'll be following badminton, table tennis, diving, shooting, weightlifting. Some of the events that China has been known to be dominant force.
What about the new categories that China has not been necessarily shining over the years?
But this time around, I think you don't expect another tennis star as great as Li Na, who won a bronze medal in Beijing. And you don't have, basketball giant like Yao Ming. And of course, you are doing without the hurdler, the champion hurdler of Liu Xiang. But you have pretty good, men's 4x100 meter relay team who may qualify representing Asia into the final of the men's relay competitions. And China also has quite competitive high jumper who may have a shot at the medal, if not a gold. But I think China will very comfortably sit in the 2nd place after the United States in terms of total number of medals and gold medals. But I don't think China has a great chance to overcome the overtake the United States as they did the host team in Beijing here in 2008.
Of course, that was the host team, right? Professor O'Reilly, I know you have a few minutes to go. So tell me, what do you think when you look at the China's delegation from afar compared to your home turf, Canada, United States as well, briefly?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Dong's comments. I think we're seeing a turnover. I mean, you think about Michael Phelps and Usain Bolt, and there's a lot of hope that they're going to, strike medals again in the twilight of their careers. And some of the former Chinese stars and others have kind of moved on. I think we're hoping, and I think Simon made this point earlier, to really see the emergence of some new stars and some new excitement. So for the next couple of Olympics and World Championships and the major sports, we get to see a new breed of Usain Bolt type athletes that we can follow, Yao Ming type athletes. So I'm excited to see what emerges from the Chinese team, who's going to do well. I've also got my eye on the 4x100 meter relay. I mean, that's a marquee event. It'll be really interesting to see how well the Chinese can do.
Wow.
And so that's really my interest and my hope, is to see some new stars emerge.
When you guys talk about this, I've already got the goosebumps on my body. I feel very excited, looking forward to that moment as you are talking about it. Thank you so much, Professor Norman O'Reilly from the University of Ohio with us. Let me go to you, Mr. Pusey. You work in China for a couple of years as a sports journalist. I'm sure you know a lot about what's going on here in China. What is your expectation?
Yeah, well, China always do incredibly well, don't they, at the Olympics in the sports that were just mentioned by your previous guest. It's interesting to see sometimes what happens in other Olympics and how they're sort of affected when they go abroad and the conditions. There's been a little bit of controversy from the Chinese delegation saying the conditions in Rio aren't quite what they were hoping or expected. But like you say, in the 4x100 meters in table tennis and in badminton, there's a high expectation that the Chinese delegation are going to do well, and I'm sure we'll see exactly the same. China, America rivaling each other for top spot in terms of the medal count in a couple of days' time. So yeah, I'm sure China will do very well once again.
Having said that, though, one thing is very important here. That is, China hosted the 2008 Olympic Games, Mr. Pusey, and later 8-bit for the 2022 Winter Olympic Games, and they got it. The question is, between these two mega events, how enthusiastic are the Chinese audiences? How enthusiastic are in the Chinese delegation for this year's Olympic Games, Mr. Pusey?
I think massively. I think despite all the controversies, the interest in the Olympics has never been higher. I think every single time a country hosts it, the opening ceremony has this new level of intrigue and interest and fascination. And London 2012 was obviously very humorous. This year's opening ceremony is supposed to be very cool. Every time, you know, there's so much interest and fascination going into the games to see who's going to emerge as the new hero for the country, and so I think interest keeps growing. And like your previous commentator mentioned, it's all about the medals. If you win a medal for your country, then your sport will be funded. This is how most delegations work. Your sport will be funded for the next 4 years, and the pride from your country is massive, and it's such a huge moment for these sportsmen. Remember, these sportsmen, athletes especially, it's every 4 years. This is their chance. It really does take 4-year cycles. So I think in China especially, that this is equal to every other games that's gone before it, and obviously there'll be so much interest given that they've won the rights for the Winter Games in about 10 years'
That's
time.
right. We in China, of course, there's upcoming 2022 games in winter, and also the sports system was talking about its reform. Meanwhile, there has been a lot of new phenomena in China's soccer, for example, just one of those sports that everybody pay attention to. So will this year's Olympic Games be able to enlighten us in any way about the Chinese sports of the future?
I think for China, you never worry too much about, you know, the patriotic sentiment.
No, you don't
and
have
China
to.
will continue to contribute the biggest audience watching the Olympics despite the time difference. But I think the reaction or the attitude from the Chinese public or population toward the Olympic will be different. It cannot be the same all the time. And now competing for headlines in the second-day news on both traditional and new media will be against, you know, other sports in China, because China is emerging as a bigger and bigger sports country.
More professional sports these
More
days.
professional sports, and like today, Chinese capital has taken over AC Milan. Chinese are the owners of both AC Milan and the biggest shareholder of Inter Milan in Italy and also elsewhere. So China is really, you know, emerging very big, not only gold medal winning nation, but also, you know, with the sports culture increasingly important in this nation.
Yes, that's right. And I am counting already down to the opening ceremony in just a few hours. Everybody gets so excited about the opening ceremony because that's where the splendid things happen. Mr. Pusey, 20 seconds for you. What are you expecting? The opening ceremony for the Rio Olympic Games.
Well, from what we heard, it's going to be very cool. A lot of samba, dancing, drumming, what Rio is famous for. It's also not going to be very expensive. I think all of the people taking part have agreed to do it for free. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they do it. I think it's going to be really fun and vibrant and colourful knowing Brazil. And yeah, like you, can't wait to see it.
All right. And what about you, Mr. Dong?
Having just watched the movie Pelé, I would love to see if he would be the person who, you know, light up the flame.
Yes, that's right. There's a big question mark, but we'll figure it out in just a few hours' time. Thank you so much, Simon Pusey and Dong Jun, for being with us. All the best. Let's enjoy the Olympic Games. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. A new movie uses virtual reality technology to tell the disastrous clash between Western technology and Australian Aboriginal communities back in the year 1950s. We speak exclusively with the movie's two producers. You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. The effect of the atomic bomb has been remembered ever since the mushroom clouds rose from Hiroshima and Nagasaki decades ago. However, the cruelty of it has also been felt elsewhere in the world. Britain tested atomic bombs in the 1950s in the remote Western Australian Pilbara Desert, home to the indigenous Martu people. As you can imagine, the people there suffered tremendously as a result without even knowing what exactly had happened to them. And for decades, that part of history was not known to anyone else until two filmmakers with the latest VR technologies brought those shocking moments of misery back to everyone in their latest movie, Collisions. It vividly unveils the history of the events in an unprecedented way in an effort to learn lessons from them.
After 15 minutes with VR glasses, you'll be feeling as if you're right there in Western Australia. Collisions, a virtual reality film, is a journey to the land of Indigenous elder Nyari Morgan and the Martu tribe in the Australian desert. His first encounter with Western culture occurred when he witnessed an atomic bomb test in the 1950s. Collisions of the title are between his traditional worldview and the cutting edge of Western technology. In the film, Nyari offers his personal experiences and Martu perspectives on preserving the planet for future generations. It was directed by Lynette Walworth, a Sydney screen artist with 2 decades plus work in digital environments, spanning a range of formats. The filmmaker is Curtis Taylor, a screen artist and a young Martu leader, who divides his time between the remote desert communities and the city.
And I met two of them, Lynette Walworth and Curtis Taylor, at the Summer Davos in Tianjin. After winning global attention, they came to China and were extremely excited to share their latest VR movie here. They believe the story about Martu, the Aboriginal people in Western Australia, and their tragic encounter with the atomic bomb should be definitely part of the world's collective memory. I interviewed them, the two of them, together, and listened as they told this dramatic story.
The essence of Collisions is Curtis's grandfather in the 1950s, before he has contact with any other Western culture at all, right? He's walking through an area and in the outback of Australia and sees no context an atomic test.
This is my grandfather, Nyari Morgan, welcoming you to his home.
What he perceives that to be is the whole film exists.
What did he perceive?
So that's the question I asked him when I met him. And he said, we thought it was the spirit of our gods rising up to speak with us. And then we saw what he perceived to be the spirits had made all the kangaroos fall down on the ground. As a gift, they thought of easy hunting. So we took those kangaroos and ate them, he says, and people were sick. And then the spirit left. That is the narration that Curtis translates for Nyari. It's a very short story. It's a tremendously powerful story. This first-hand account.
What was it like for you as a family member and also as a co-producer of this beautiful work?
You know, even the technology and even the, the story was very inspiring to capture this in VR. For us, or for me, there's very new grounds to work. I never work with VR, so it's not a traditional film, on a flat screen or traditional techniques to film. I mean, the storytelling is the same, and how you come up with the ideas about the images, the mise en scene, throughout the idea of the project. For us, or for me anyway, yeah, it's my first time working in virtual reality.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, hard work.
Hard work, just like filming, and so you're thinking about other things within the schedule of the day about filming, and I guess looking back on it now, I can see how just by the reactions of people watching VR, whether it be in Switzerland, anywhere, wherever we're showing it, that I get to appreciate it more.
He saw it
before he came to Switzerland.
And Curtis has a headset, and so he has it in the community, and so if people watch it out there.
They're excited about this?
Yeah, very excited, yeah.
This is an interesting combination, isn't it, Lynette? I mean, it's a combination of one of the stories from the people that are Aboriginals in Australia who settled there the earliest, combined with the latest technologies.
Well, virtual reality, the power of it, I think, is that you feel present.
Yes.
You feel present, you feel there. This film followed protocols. I can't just arrive there, I have to be invited. Someone has to ask me to come, and there has to be a reason for my coming. And so that's in the beginning of this film. I say Nyeri has a story he wants to share, and that's why we're traveling. And then you'll see Nyeri singing. There's like a formality to the greeting, and then he actually walks up and says, hello, you've come from a long way away. You're met, you're invited, and then you're met. And you know why you're there. This is hopefully trying to give a sense of this technology, not just to co-opt someone else's place, but for a story. I think of it as the opposite, the power of the technology to allow a story that's been hidden to be sent out. And that's the process that I tried to instigate, that's the process that we have followed. And I think that that's why it's having the impact it's having, because there's something authentic there that actually has been shared.
What was that revisiting of the story itself for the grandfather of Curtis?
So I think Nyeri is a man, from what I understand, and we've talked about this, who's imagined sharing this story for decades. So for him, I think it was an opportunity to share, as Curtis said, a hidden history with us, with you. Because this is a hidden history even in Australia. So really we had to map out what it was he wanted to share, then bring all these technologies to Curtis's home village, and then capture not just this story, but what also Nyeri and the Māori wanted to share about the way they care for their country. So we have this is the collision, the parallels of the intervention of this most destructive of technologies that we have developed, the most destructive thing we've developed, against a long-term caring and stewardship.
Do you feel guilty at the time when you were trying to learn the story? Because it's really those elsewhere that has brought all of these tragedies to the local people.
You know, I think what I feel is probably best described as humility. I'm aware when I'm with Curtis's family in my own country that there is so much knowledge we have ignored, we have not learnt from, we have not received, we have not asked. So I am very happy as a filmmaker to have the opportunity to work with the Madu, to try and use our contemporary technologies to show what we still do not know in our own country.
So how has the technology been used? I mean, when you watch it with VR, it is so powerful. How much does technology help you to tell that story? And would Nyeri also be surprised once they saw, the technology is being used to recount the story that happened decades ago?
Everything is done in a community setting. So when we arrive with this team, and there's camera people from Palo Alto, and there's sound crew from Sydney.
How many of you?
We had 7. We put the camera down in Nola and Nyeri's yard. Everyone comes around and looks at that camera. Everyone looks at the technology. And Nyeri said, oh, it has 16 eyes. He's right. There were 16 cameras.
Uh-huh.
So I said, yes, it has 16 eyes. He could tell from that moment everything those cameras would see. Much better than I could. He knew what it would see from above. He knew, couldn't he, what it would see from below. And as Curtis says, so then he could tell us where to put the camera.
Yeah.
The camera.
So he's
should go
very
here.
quick to getting familiar with this
The
technology.
specialization of that topography, which is homeland.
Of course.
You know, actually what those Palo Alto cameraman said is, I have never done a quicker presentation of this technology anywhere in the world. So then, as you see at the end, Nyeri is looking, he's looking.
Yes.
And so I guess what we hope is communicated is, wherever that camera went, wherever the camera is where you are when you are inside the world of VR. When you are inside the film, you are sitting where the camera was. Nyeri knew when he addressed the camera, he knew when he was showing or pointing things to the camera, he was pointing to you.
Mm-hmm.
He's telling you through this technology in a way that's not possible in any other. So the agency in this work rests with him, which is the way it has to be.
Curtis, let me tell you what I felt after the first time watching it. I was in Switzerland, in Davos, out of a very busy schedule. And once, after a long line, sitting in the chair with the goggles, I thought I'm just going to have one of those films, right? Let's relax a little bit. But it immediately put me onto the spot, as if I was one of those person experiencing the whole story, from the beautiful scenery to the explosion, and then all the disasters happen afterwards. At the end of it, I didn't want to stand up. I was still scared. And I had a deep, deep sigh. The girl who was helping us with the goggles took the goggles away. Curtis, the grandpa back at home, knew that he's making such a splash all over the world.
I think he's been talking about that for since as long as I can remember. But it's, you know, through this format, through VR, this story has been, his story has been traveling to, you know, everywhere, all over the world, entering, you know, places like conferences like the World Economic Forum, but also the minds of really powerful and influential people that make, you know, decisions about our globe every day. And I guess for him to infiltrate that in some way, you know, people's thinking, people's mind. I think that's what he wanted to achieve, you know.
Where to go from here? You made this wonderful work, you present a living history, but at the end of the day, will that wake people up?
This work is getting traction now in ways that are surprising even to us. And I think it's because of the effect that you just described. Having it start its life in Davos has, I would say, opened doors for this work, exactly in line with, I think, what Nyeri would have imagined and hoped. It's been to Washington, to the climate summit. It's come to here, to Tianjin. It's been to the UN buildings in Vienna, to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty meetings. And now people are wanting to use it as a tool to try and inform and change minds. And that is the most you could ask for an artwork, I think. That it isn't just an experience, but that it's a catalyst for change.
And are you proud of your grandpa?
I'm really happy for this story. My spirit is happy that it's being shared, being shown, and being listened to.
I'm sure your grandpa is also very proud of this grandson, who is a wonderful filmmaker and has managed to get the decades-old story out to all of the world.
I'm just grateful for stories like this so that I can capture it.
Very modest, I have to say, Curtis, you are. It's such a pleasure to have both of you here. You have done some beautiful piece of work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much,
Lovely
Curtis.
to talk.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insights CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night and have a great weekend.